simple thing to answer, but what I can say with certainty is that we've had the balance completely wrong for decades. That is, we had an open spigot for these risks to be present in our system without the balance and checks that are required. And so you see, if you watch what the Trump administration has done with respect to this, this year, it's different because of the virus, but in 2021, 2022, there'll be 350, 360,000 Chinese students that come to America. We want these students here, but there has to be a process. There has to be a rigorous evaluation. And some of that is the responsibility of the United States government to undertake, and we have to do a better job of doing that. But we need institutions, too, that are transparent, that are clear, that are following the requirements, both U.S. Department of Education requirements, the requirements to make sure that U.S. property rights are protected in the way that you just described. If you have someone invent something, we want the fruits of that effort to benefit the United States of America and not end up being used to surveil American citizens in cities all across the world. We've had the balance fundamentally wrong because there was this notion that there was no cost connected to permitting the risk that the Chinese Communist Party identified, the opportunity that they sought, and the efforts they have undertaken. You all would have seen, it's been a few months back now, we want Chinese diplomats to be here engaged in diplomacy, but the Chinese Communist Party was using their consulate in Houston as a den of spies. And for an awfully long time, the United States just said, we're not going to do anything about that. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to the American people from a national security perspective. It's unacceptable to the people of Houston and the businesses that are there, that these so-called diplomats are out stealing their stuff. And so we did the work. We collectively, the United States government did the work, identified the problem set, and solved the problem. This is the model that we have to use. The model has been, for an awfully long time, it's a big country. There's enormous economic opportunity by engaging with them. Let's just do that and hope things turn out well. It's too dangerous. The Chinese Communist Party has a mission set. We only need to listen to General Secretary Xi Jinping's vision for global hegemony and the capacity that he has developed to actually execute. He has capability and intent. Those are the things that present risk to America, and so we have a responsibility to take on these hard problems, to protect American freedom, to welcome citizens who want to come study at our universities from all across the world, but do so with an eye towards making sure that we do all the things that we are duty-bound to ensure that we protect.
So thank you. It turns out I myself came to this country as an international student. So I grew up in Spain. I was lucky enough to get a Fulbright scholarship, one of the wonderful programs of the United States State Department, and I have experienced it personally. How thousands and thousands of smart young people around the world, they dream of coming to a great American university. That's their own dream to go to somewhere else. They want to be here. So, always sensitive to, again, being smart about the way you described it, about protecting our interest, and at the same time not sending the message that would somehow weaken that huge advantage that we have, right? That we have first picks. It's almost like we have first draft picks every year. Smart people around the world, we get to choose first. So how do we, continue to send that message? That, wait a second, we want smart people to come here. So given that you're our first, our number one salesman also, that's, I guess, part of your job description.
I think I just sent exactly that message. This is why I'm here. We want these students. But when they're here, it can't be the case that they live in fear. Right? These institutions, you all have an obligation to protect these students as well. I mean, these students are returning home to suffer. A Fulbright student coming in from some country ought not be returned to their home country and to suffer from the jackbooted thugs that now want to take the information that they got, send them back into the United States only to have them just take a little bit more information that they're going to hand off to the Chinese MSS, their security apparatus, or the People's Liberation Army, their formal military team, or to the Chinese intelligence services. This is not the best of America. we have a responsibility to those Chinese students too, in addition to the duty that I described to protect American national security. We have an imperative to get this right. And when we do, I'm convinced, President Cabrera, I am convinced that this will still be a beacon. The number of American students studying in China in 2021 I didn't refer to, it's very small. Why?
I have it here.
Yes, why? Why is that? It's because if you want to be a technologist, if you want to be an innovator, if you want access to capital, if you want to be around a network, an ecosystem of innovators to create the next great whatever it is you want to go create, where do you do it? You do it in the United States of America. We cannot forfeit that capacity by allowing the Chinese Communist Party to infiltrate our research institutions and take that away from us after all it is that the American private sector, the American taxpayers of the state of Georgia have invested in preserving, promoting, and building out this enormous capacity. We've lived in a bit of a fantasy world for the last 40 years. It is time for the balance to be struck to both maintain our competitive advantage and protect the American advantage from the threats that the Chinese Communist Party has clearly stated they intend to, the cost they intend to impose upon us.
So I have the data. In fact, this is your data. This is the Open Doors.
I know it well. Yes.
I love it. By the way, keep this. This is the best source of information we get every year. And speaking of imbalances, that's another imbalance I wanted to discuss with you, right? So we get about, I mean, give or take, we get about 1 million international students in the U.S. every year. About half of that comes from China and India alone. A third, more than a third, like 35%, is from China. Then when you turn the page, you're absolutely right. The number of American students that go to China, China is not even the #1 destination, is 11,000.
Yep.
So here's what I'm thinking. Okay, you've been a businessman, so you land in Shanghai, you go to a boardroom to make a deal, and it turns out that the guys on the other side of the table, they speak English, they know our culture, they watch our movies, they laugh at our jokes, they know all about us. In most cases, we know very little about their culture. Shouldn't we be sending vastly larger number of American students to China to learn their culture and not to stay there and set up their companies? We want them back here in Atlanta, Midtown, by the way, Tech Square. But to learn about China. Yeah. Don't you think that would be a good idea?
It is an enormous knowledge gap, enormous knowledge imbalance. I would agree with that. I would tell you that we work very hard at the State Department. We are nowhere near where we need to be to have enough Mandarin speakers so that we can understand, even at the most senior diplomatic levels in the United States, that we have the capability to watch and read what's coming out in the Mandarin language press from China. So it is an enormous undertaking. You talked about this as an imbalance. One of the central theses of our policy with respect to China these past 4 years has in fact been about that, about reciprocity. So imagine now you're a company here at Georgia Tech and you want to go build out a business in China because you want to sell to the 1.4 billion people there and you need to make an investment. The rules for you to invest there are radically different than some young person in China who'd like to come invest here in Atlanta. That's not right. We need fair and reciprocal rules when it comes to foreign direct investment. We need fair and reciprocal rules when it comes to press reporting. So one of the reasons we know so much less about the Chinese culture has less to do with the number of students and the fact that a person who is a credentialed Western reporter inside of China can't move around freely. This is an enormous imbalance. We've tried to take that on. We had Chinese propaganda outlets here in the United States that were running free and clear, while valid U.S. media companies that wanted to report on what was taking place, by the way, at an incredibly important time when the Chinese Communist Party was permitting the export of a virus around the world, and they couldn't get to the places that they needed to get to find the information that would have been very valuable for the United States to have had in a timely fashion. So there's enormous information imbalance attached to that. I talked about one reason there's only 11,000 American students traveling to China. It's that they don't want them there. They don't want Americans. Why? Because when Americans go to a college campus, you've seen it. I traveled the campus a bit this morning. Students jogging, running, talking, having fun, inquiring, doing the things that we do in a place, a democracy, a republic like our country. This is not the Chinese campus. And so there's an imbalance there. And we have to work to convince and impose cost on the Chinese Communist Party until such time as there is reciprocity in every space. The President talked about it in trade. We've talked about it in terms of freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. I could go through the list of places where we have for decades permitted the Chinese Communist Party to have an exception to every international rule. So what's another example? The World Trade Organization, an important institution to make lives better for jobs for people right here in the state of Georgia. Nearly every country participates in a single way. The Chinese Communist Party says, no, we're special. We should be a developing country with a set of trade preferences that benefit China enormously. And what the Americans just, for decades, this isn't partisan, both political parties just said, we're going to let that pass. It can't be any longer. And this is what President Trump has said. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to demand that China comply with the same set of rules that every other nation is asked to comply with. And when we do, America will be safer and more secure. America will be more prosperous. Our allies and partners in Southeast Asia and in South Korea and in Australia and in Europe, they'll be safer and more prosperous. And we will build out a coalition that simply demands that sovereign nations compete on a fair and level playing field. It should happen in academia, it should happen in the commercial space. If we get that right, America will be just fine.
So let me bring the topic to something that